124 days. That number should stop you cold. 124 days since an 84-year-old woman vanished from her own home in the Catalina Foothills of Tucson, Arizona. Not from a parking lot, not from a hiking trail, from inside her house at 2:28 in the morning while the rest of the neighborhood slept. Nancy Guthrie did not walk away. She could not have. Her mobility made that physically impossible. Whatever happened to her that night, it was done to her, and whoever did it walked in, took her, and disappeared into the Arizona dark without leaving a single trace that investigators could move on. Until now. Because something just changed in this case, something quiet, something that the people who understand forensic science say could be the single most important development since the investigation began. A hair. One strand of hair recovered from inside Nancy's home. It sounds small. It sounds like the kind of detail that gets buried in a case file and forgotten. It is not small. That one strand of hair is now sitting inside the FBI laboratory at Quantico, Virginia. And, according to one of the most respected forensic genetic genealogists in the country, a woman who has personally solved 6 cases using this exact type of evidence, if that hair belongs to the person who took Nancy, it is going to be the piece of information that breaks this entire case. Here is what makes it significant. The hair found inside Nancy's home is what forensic scientists call a rootless hair, a strand that shed naturally with no root attached. For most of forensic science history, rootless hair was treated as nearly useless for forensic analysis. The shaft of the hair does not carry nuclear DNA in quantities that traditional testing could work with. Investigators would find it, log it, and move on. Dead end. But the science changed. A process developed by Dr. Ed Green can now extract what are called SNP profiles from the shaft of a rootless hair, single nucleotide polymorphism profiles. Genetic data that, while different from traditional nuclear DNA, is sufficient to build a forensic genealogy case, sufficient to be run against public DNA databases, sufficient to identify biological relatives, and from those relatives to build a family tree that leads back to a name, a real person. CeCe Moore knows this process better than almost anyone alive.
As far as the databases, although there are over 50 million people who have taken direct-to-consumer DNA tests, law enforcement is actually barred from the vast majority of those profiles. The 3 largest databases have said law enforcement cannot compare against their databases.
Her work helped identify the Golden State Killer. She has built family trees from partial DNA matches that put suspects in courtrooms after decades of silence. When she appeared on journalist Brian Enton's show and was asked about the hair found inside Nancy's home, she did not hedge. She did not say maybe or possibly or we'll have to wait and see. She said she had been hoping there was hair to work with. She said if they really do have a rootless hair and it came from the person who took Nancy, this is going to be the piece of information that solves the case. Not might solve, not could potentially help, will solve. Hi viewers, now that the FBI finally has this hair at Quantico, do you believe CeCe Moore and her team will get a name from it, or do you think too much time has already been lost? Drop your answer in the comments right now.
True crime. Real stories. Unsolved truths.
That statement from CeCe Moore carries a weight that is difficult to overstate. This is not a commentator guessing from the sidelines. This is the woman the FBI calls, the woman who has sat across from the same kind of evidence and watched it produce answers when nothing else could. One strand of hair, one laboratory in Virginia, one forensic genealogist who has done this before and says it will work again. But here is what nobody was talking about loudly enough until now. That hair did not go to Quantico when it was first collected. It did not go to CeCe Moore. It did not go to the FBI laboratory that had a plane sitting on a runway the night Nancy disappeared, ready to fly evidence directly to Quantico the moment investigators gave the word. It went somewhere else entirely. And where it went and how long it sat there is the part of this story that should make every person following this case stop and ask a very uncomfortable question about the people in charge of finding Nancy Guthrie. The night Nancy Guthrie disappeared, the FBI was ready. Not in a general sense, ready in the specific, operational, logistical sense. A fixed-wing aircraft was sitting on a runway in Tucson, fueled and waiting, prepared to fly physical evidence directly to the FBI laboratory at Quantico the moment investigators gave the clearance. That is how seriously the Bureau treated this case from hour one. That is how quickly they wanted to move. They never got the clearance. Instead, the hair collected from inside Nancy's home was sent to a private forensic laboratory in Florida. Not Quantico, not Astrea Forensics in California, not CeCe Moore's team, a private lab in Florida that the Pima County Sheriff's Office had an existing relationship with. And that decision, made quietly, without public explanation, without apparent urgency, cost this investigation 11 weeks. While the FBI waited, while CeCe Moore waited, while the one piece of physical evidence that forensic experts say could identify the person who took Nancy sat in a facility in Florida, the case went nowhere. Tips were processed, leads were chased, 2 raids were conducted that ultimately produced nothing, and the hair, the evidence that changes everything, sat in the wrong building. Ben Williamson said it publicly. The FBI's own Assistant Director of Public Affairs went on record and stated that the Bureau had asked to test this DNA 2 months prior, using the same technology they have always had available. The request was made. The answer from the local sheriff was essentially wait. The FBI asked. The sheriff said wait, for 11 weeks. And here's the technical reason that delay caused real damage to this investigation. The private lab in Florida does not have the capability to extract SNP profiles from a rootless hair shaft. That is not a general forensic skill. It is specialized work built on the specific methodology developed by Dr. Ed Green, requiring the FBI's direct partnership with Astrea Forensics and requiring CeCe Moore's expertise to translate the resulting partial genetic profiles into a usable family tree. None of that existed in Florida. None of it was available. The most significant piece of forensic evidence in this entire investigation was sitting in a facility that was structurally incapable of fully analyzing it. Not because they were working on it, because they were the wrong lab. CeCe Moore made a point about this that lands somewhere important. She said if that hair had a root attached, the Florida lab could have handled it. A rooted hair carries nuclear DNA, traditional testing. The case would likely already be solved. The fact that the Florida lab processed the sample and nothing came back tells her almost everything she needs to know. The hair is almost certainly rootless, and rootless hair requires exactly the kind of analysis that only exists at the FBI and Astrea Forensics. So the sheriff sent it to the one place in the country that could not finish the job. Sheriff Nanos gave an interview to a local television affiliate in the weeks that followed, and Brian Enton, the journalist who has been closer to this case than almost any other reporter, noticed something specific in the language Nanos used. The sheriff kept saying labs, not lab, labs, plural. He said investigators were relying on labs, that the reason the process was taking so long was the labs, that they were waiting on what the labs would produce. That single word, repeated, confirms what sources had already been reporting. Multiple laboratories are now involved in the chain of analysis. The FBI at Quantico handling initial processing, Astrea Forensics extracting the SNP profiles, CeCe Moore's team building family trees from partial genetic matches, potentially additional partner labs analyzing the mixed DNA also recovered at the scene, DNA that Nanos himself confirmed came from more than one person. Multiple labs, multiple processes, each one dependent on the last. The chain is finally running. But while the forensic side of this investigation is moving forward, a former federal prosecutor sat down with Brian Enton and said something that had nothing to do with DNA, something that cut to the core of how this case will eventually be decided. Not in a lab, in a courtroom.
and the warning he delivered about what is happening right now and what is not happening should concern every single person following this investigation.
Tad DiBiase did not come to this case as a commentator. He is a former federal prosecutor who has spent 20 years doing one specific thing: teaching law enforcement and fellow prosecutors how to bring no-body homicide cases to trial. He literally wrote the book on it. When prosecutors across the country face a case where a body has never been found and they need to know if they can win, he is the person they call. Brian Enton sat down with DiBiase specifically about Nancy Guthrie, and what DiBiase said in that conversation changes how this entire investigation has to be understood. The first question was the one everyone asks: do they need to find Nancy's body to prosecute this case? DiBiase's answer was direct: no. A no-body homicide can absolutely be tried successfully. He has done it himself. He has seen it done at the federal level. The law does not require a body to prove that a crime occurred. But he said something alongside that answer that carries equal weight. It is always better to have a body, even partial remains, because remains answer questions that nothing else can. How did she die? When was she moved? Did a pre-existing medical condition become fatal after she was taken, which would still constitute a serious crime? Or was there something else involved? Without remains, prosecutors lose all of that medical and forensic context. They walk into trial with a gap in the story that a skilled defense attorney will fill with doubt. Then DiBiase said the thing that stopped Brian cold. He said the failure to conduct extensive, documented, grid-based searches of the desert surrounding Nancy's home is not simply a humanitarian failure. It is a prosecutorial mistake, one that will make the eventual trial harder, one that is being made right now while the investigation is still active. The logic is airtight. In a no-body homicide trial, prosecutors have to prove two things to a jury. First, that the person is actually dead, not missing, not unaccounted for, dead. Second, that the person sitting at the defense table is the one responsible. If investigators cannot point to documented, exhaustive, methodical searches of the terrain surrounding the last known location of the victim, a defense attorney stands up and delivers a very simple, very effective argument. How do you know she did not walk away? How do you know she did not wander into the desert and collapse from a medical event? How do you know she is not alive somewhere right now? You have not looked. You do not know. And you are asking my client to face the consequences of a crime you cannot even prove happened. That argument plants a seed of doubt in a juror's mind, and once that seed is planted, it is very difficult to remove. But prosecutors can stand in front of a jury and say, we searched, we deployed drones, we used canine teams, we conducted aerial sweeps, we covered every square mile within a reasonable radius of Nancy's home, and we found nothing. Her mobility made it physically impossible for her to have traveled that distance on her own. The only explanation left standing is that she was taken so far by whoever came to her door that her remains have not been recovered. That is how you close the door on the defense argument, not by finding Nancy, by proving through documented evidence that she could not have gone anywhere alone. DiBiase was clear about what that means in practice. Every search that comes up empty is evidence. Every documented grid that was covered and found nothing is a brick in the wall of the eventual prosecution. The absence of remains, when paired with the documented absence of any viable alternative, becomes its own form of proof. Right now, that wall is not being built. The sheriff has declined outside search assistance. No widespread grid search has been conducted. The documented record of exhaustive searching that DiBiase says prosecutors need to eliminate defense theories at trial simply does not exist yet. And there's an organization sitting less than a phone call away that has the equipment, the personnel, the experience, and the willingness to build that entire wall in under a week. The sheriff told them no. The United Cajun Navy is not a group of well-meaning volunteers with flashlights and good intentions. They are a structured, experienced search and rescue operation with drone specialists capable of photogrammetry terrain mapping, canine teams that rotate shifts specifically because of desert heat conditions, manned aircraft, thermal drones that scan terrain for heat signatures that could indicate the presence of remains, and a formal partnership with a Mexican search organization called the Topos, a group that operates along the United States and Mexico border and has earned enough respect from every faction operating in that region that criminal organizations leave them alone to do their work. They submitted a formal operational plan to the Pima County Sheriff's Office months ago. They asked for direction. They said, "Tell us where to search, and we will search there. We will coordinate entirely within whatever parameters you set. We will operate under your authority. We will share everything we find. Just point us somewhere, and we will go." The response they received back was essentially a non-answer, a general statement that outside help was not being accepted at this time. No direct engagement with their plan, no feedback on their proposal, no alternative offered. Just a quiet, institutional no that was delivered without explanation and never revisited. The leader of the Cajun Navy told Brian Enton exactly what a green light would produce. Within 72 hours of receiving approval, the first personnel would be on the ground. Within 1 week, the full operation would be running. Drones mapping the terrain through photogrammetry, canine teams working rotating schedules around the desert heat, thermal aircraft scanning from above for anything the ground teams might miss. And then he said the statistic that makes the sheriff's refusal genuinely hard to follow. On approximately 50% of searches the Cajun Navy conducts across the country, they find remains they were not originally looking for. Not the person they came to find, someone else. A cold case that had gone untouched for years. A missing person whose family had stopped expecting answers. They close cases by accident, as a byproduct of showing up and doing the work. 50%. Half of every search they run produces something nobody expected to find. The sheriff said no to that. Now put that statistic next to what Tad DiBiase said about the prosecutorial damage caused by insufficient searching. Put the Cajun Navy's offer next to DiBiase's warning that undocumented searches leave defense attorneys room to argue at trial that nobody really looked. Put their 72-hour deployment window next to the 124 days that have already passed without a widespread grid search of the desert surrounding Nancy's home. The math is not complicated. The United Cajun Navy is not offering to interfere in the investigation. They are not asking for access to evidence or case files or investigative strategy. They are offering to cover ground, to document what is there and what is not there, to produce exactly the kind of exhaustive, witnessed, recorded search record that DiBiase says prosecutors need to close off alternative defense theories before a jury ever hears them. They are offering to solve two problems at once: find Nancy if she is out there, and if she is not found, create the documented record that tells a jury the absence of her body is not from lack of trying. The sheriff has still not said yes. But the search failure, as significant as it is not the only dimension of this case that Tad DiBiase found unusual. He said something else in that conversation with Brian Enton, something rooted in 20 years of working these cases that places the Nancy Guthrie investigation in a category almost entirely its own, a category so rare he could count comparable cases on one hand across his entire career. Tad DiBiase has worked no-body homicide cases for 20 years. In that time, he has seen patterns repeat, the same dynamics, the same relationships, the same categories of motive showing up across hundreds of cases in different cities, different states, different circumstances. 54% of no-body homicide cases involve people in domestic relationships, husbands and wives, partners, family members. The remainder involve people who knew each other in some capacity, friends, business connections, people tied together by some prior history that eventually turned into a motive. That is the landscape of almost every no-body murder case ever prosecuted. Nancy Guthrie's case does not fit it. A complete stranger walking into an 84-year-old woman's home in the middle of the night, taking her and vanishing without identification is not a domestic case. It is not a relationship case. There is no prior connection investigators have been able to establish between Nancy and whoever appeared at her door on February 1st. DiBiase said he could count comparable stranger cases on the fingers of one hand across his entire career, maybe not even that. That rarity creates a specific problem for prosecutors. In a standard no-body case, the prosecution builds around motive. There is a relationship to establish, a prior history to document, a reason the jury can understand for why this specific person would have done this to this specific victim. That narrative framework is gone here. If the person who took Nancy is a true stranger, prosecutors have to build the entire case around physical and forensic evidence alone, without the thread of a human relationship to tie it together for a jury. That is hard work, even for the most experienced federal prosecutors. But DiBiase did not say the case is impossible to prosecute. He said clearly, yes, this case could be tried successfully as a no-body homicide. The evidence that already exists gives prosecutors something to build around. The doorbell footage of a person arriving at Nancy's door, her pacemaker data recording her biological state during the window of her disappearance, her blood confirmed on the porch, DNA from unknown individuals recovered at the scene, the rootless hair now at Quantico. And then there is the reward, $1,200,000, unclaimed, 4 months in, not a single call that has produced a viable lead. DiBiase was direct about what that means and what it does not mean. Rewards are a tool, but they rarely break cases on their own. In his experience, what actually cracks a no-body homicide is not someone calling for money. It is someone who gets arrested for something completely unrelated and who has information about the perpetrator and trades that information for consideration on their own case. Someone who gets locked up and says, I know something about someone you want to know about more than you want to know about me. That pattern is already being anticipated. Former detective Robbie Mayer confirmed to Brian Anton that every single person who comes through the doors of the Pima County Sheriff's Department or the Tucson Police Department gets the same question, do you know anything about Nancy Guthrie? And Mayer added something that reframes what 50,000 tips actually means. He said investigators could have the suspect's name right now sitting in an unprocessed lead. The name exists, nobody has gotten to it yet. He knows this from personal experience, from the primetime rapist case he worked decades ago, where a detective on the team had the suspect's name assigned to him in a lead he simply had not processed yet. The case broke a different way, but the name was already there, waiting. 50,000 tips. At an average of 15 minutes per lead, that is an enormous processing task, and somewhere in that stack, the answer may already be sitting in a folder that nobody has opened.
Jennifer Coffindaffer spent 28 years with the FBI, not as an analyst sitting behind a desk, as a special agent working cases. She knows investigative protocol, not from a textbook, but from the inside, from the decisions made in real time during real investigations. And when she spoke publicly about the Nancy Guthrie case, she said something that has not received nearly enough attention. The FBI has enhanced images of the suspect, not the grainy, partial doorbell footage that was released to the public, something beyond that, clearer, more detailed, colorized. She said the first thing any competent investigator does with video or photographic evidence is have it enhanced. That is not advanced practice. That is standard, basic, the first step. And she said she is confident the Bureau has done exactly that with the doorbell footage from Nancy's home, footage that captured the person who appeared at her door in the early hours of February 1st. Those images exist. Better images, sharper images, images that may show details about the suspect's appearance, build, clothing, or movements that the publicly released footage simply does not show. And they are being withheld. Coffindaffer used the word disgust. A 28-year FBI veteran said she was disgusted that those images have not been made public. Nobody has explained why. Forensic expert and former detective Morgan Wright has been tracking this case closely, and he laid out the 3 pathways he believes are most likely to produce the next major development. Video forensics, going deeper into the footage and the metadata of the camera system itself for information that was never visible in the original recording. Cell site analysis, mapping the movement of devices in and around the Catalina Foothills neighborhood during the exact window when Nancy was taken. And blockchain analysis of the cryptocurrency used in the ransom demands, tracing the digital trail through every transaction that followed. 3 separate threads. Any one of them could pull this case open. And sitting alongside all of it, federal prosecutors are already embedded in this investigation, not waiting for a finished case file to arrive on their desk, actively embedded, working alongside investigators from the beginning, shaping how evidence is collected, how witnesses are approached, how search warrants are written. Brian Enton was in Tucson and saw it himself. State prosecutors and federal prosecutors walking through Nancy's home before it was returned to her family. DiBiase said when he heard Sheriff Nanos using language about rules of court and guardrails in public interviews, that told him everything. Prosecutors are advising investigators in real time. Every move in this investigation is being made with one eye permanently fixed on the courtroom. That is the right way to build a case. That is what eventually produces a conviction that holds. So here is where this investigation stands. 124 days after Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home in the Catalina Foothills of Tucson on 2:28 in the morning on February 1st. A rootless hair is finally at Quantico. CeCe Moore and Astrea Forensics are working on it. The technology to extract a genetic profile from rootless hair has already produced results in 6 prior cases from Moore's own hands. The investigation is being run with federal prosecutors involved at every stage. New technological tools are being brought in. Every person arrested in Tucson is being asked about Nancy. 50,000 tips are being processed. And somewhere in that stack, according to a detective who has lived this exact scenario before, the answer may already exist in a lead nobody has opened yet. And Nancy's pacemaker is still running, still logging, still keeping count of every moment since she was taken. The data stored in that device holds a precise biological record of what her body experienced that night and in every hour that followed. It is evidence that cannot be altered, cannot be explained away. The truth of what happened to Nancy Guthrie is stored in that pacemaker, and in a laboratory in California and a facility in Virginia, the truth of who did it may be stored in a single strand of hair that spent 11 weeks in the wrong place before finally arriving where it needed to be. It is in the right hands now, the right laboratory, the right technology, the right expert. But there is a piece of this case that has not been fully addressed publicly yet, something that connects directly to the person captured on that doorbell footage, something investigators are examining, and a former FBI agent says points toward a question nobody has answered on camera. How did whoever took Nancy know exactly how to get to her? Derek Crime Archives will be covering that angle in the next video, and the answer, when it comes, is going to reframe everything that has been reported about this case from the beginning. Do not miss it. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home. Her family deserves answers, and the person who walked up to her door on February 1st deserves to answer for every single day of those 124. The clock is still running.